So, how do political scientists actually draw our theoretical and empirical maps of the world? How do we figure out what we know, and how do we know it, and how do we go about actually gathering information about the world? I think from a general standpoint, for those of you who might not have taken too many School of Politics and International Relations classes, it might be useful to kind of categorize the different ways, at least as I see it, that political scientists gather information about the world and what they're actually trying to do with that information. The first is kind of like my father, the historian, focusing on thick description of what actually happened, who did what to whom and where, to understand the mechanics of how things came about over time. The second would be trying to understand the why. Why did people do the things that they did, right? The causal explanations. I think that's where I find the most interesting challenges, puzzles, and questions to answer. And I think a lot of the research that we're going to be looking at over the course of the semester, I've tried to select readings that really are the most influential or important or useful in trying to understand the why things happened, causes at different levels, whether background environmental decisions or individual political leaders or individuals doing something. After that, once you have an understanding of the description of how things happened and why they did, you maybe be able to tell something about where we're going to be able to predict outcomes. The most obvious way that we use political science to predict is election outcomes, right? I'm sure this class is going to end right about the time of the US presidential election, but a lot of political scientists are engaging in a lot of predictive exercises to see who's likely to win that election. The election here in Australia in 2019 was one in which there were a lot of predictions that ended up not bearing out. But prediction is, in a lot of ways, what drives a lot of our interest in description and explanations to be able to understand what's likely to go to happen in the future, or to be able to figure out what policies are more effective in steering society towards one direction or another. That's public policy, the fourth kind of main area for political science research, to figure out what works, what doesn't, and if you change policies, how might that change outcomes. Um, I think through the quantitative analysis you're going to read a lot about in this semester. It can be a little much for some people, and I think I want to recognize from the beginning these are tools that might not apply to every specific situation. They are popular for a reason, in that they allow us to speak and aggregate a large amount of information about a large number of events and look at general trends. But dating back to the American founding fathers and beforehand, James Madison, in one of the Federalist papers, said, "Nothing can be more fallacious than to found our political calculations on arithmetical principles." Right? So always be skeptical about the underlying assumptions that goes into any theory that we read in this class, as well as specifically on the kind of evidence that they use. You can elide or avoid difficult events using quantitative case study thick description, but you can also do it just as easily, if not more, using quantitative models. But a lot of the maps that we're going to draw are going to be statistical maps, ones in which you can try to hold some things constant to be able to focus on one factor that you're particularly interested in looking at. When I kind of think about the highs and lows of both prediction as well as explanation and the difficulty in explaining the underlying assumptions of the models that we use. I think of Nate Silver. He used to be, I think he got his political science PhD. He did political research. Now he created the website 538 back in 2012. His statistical models predicting U.S. House seats in the legislature, I think he got every single one right, which made his fortune. Created his website. He ended up selling it to the American version of the ABC, and so you can see that at when it's successful, people think that these tools are quite useful. So this is back when Nate Silver was in fashion, and then out of fashion, predictions are often probabilistic. That you have a 70% chance of something happens, so everyone focuses on the 70%, not necessarily on the 30% that something won't happen. And so in the 2016 lead-ups to the presidential election, Nate Silver fell out of fashion. So we are still a very young field compared to economics or physics or mathematics. Political science is a very young field, born out of the interwar period between World War One and World War Two, and we're still answering some of these kind of basic questions of description and explanation. And so I think prediction, elections are concrete things in which one thing happens or another, but a lot of things that we're going to look at are more probabilistic, that there are uncertainties attached to them. And so you see articles critiquing political scientists for these probabilistic kind of explanations about the world, but the world is incredibly complex. Um, so, yeah, easy to critique. As Nassim Taleb is one on Twitter, one of the more entertaining follows on Twitter, to see how he gets into flame wars with political scientists and others who he thinks are not rigorous enough in their studies. Definitely doesn't pull any punches. And I think when the research that you read, it can seem very clean cut and on the printed page that it's exact, but there are real world debates about the different causes and effects that we're going to be looking at in this semester. A lot of art that goes into creating research designs that might always and not always get attention. And what we understand about the phenomena that we're covering this semester will be incomplete compared to our knowledge in 10 years or 20 years. So it's an ongoing thing. And so I think when you look at prediction, I have a question I'd be interested to get your guys' feedback on in the question number 3 in Waddle. If you were a modern day forecasting Cassandra, what political outcome would you look at first? If you wanted to be able to get to that level of prediction to be incredibly accurate, what part of the political world would you be in, or the environmental or the human security world, would you be interested in focusing on first?